Now, there were some comments in the Three Amigos radio video that I did the other day, quite justifiable comments saying that I didn't exactly make a lot of effort in trying to work out why the Bush radio was a bit tinny, and it was probably a better radio than I'd estimated it to be, and there was probably a fault. And yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I was really doing that video as a way of just ripping through three radios pretty quickly, but as people have suggested, it could be a problem with the radio itself, and why didn't I actually fix it? That's what this channel's supposed to be about. The speaker itself was suggested as a source of the problem, and I think that's proved to be quite true. I've put another speaker on here.
Oleg managed to leave the city early this month, but still has friends and family there.
He has a couple of seats in the car, and we know that we can grab them and go together, but because of the...
And that's much better. So obviously the speaker is a massive contributor to this. Now, unfortunately, this speaker is too big to fit in the case because you've only got the space here for that little hole for the existing speaker to go through. And whereas this is lower, I think it will still foul the board. So anyway, I will search around for a better speaker, or a newer speaker anyway, that will fit in here. The other thing I notice is
Senior generals were scared to tell Mr. Putin the truth. General Sir Nick Parker, who's a former commander of the British Army's land forces, said so far the Russian action in Ukraine...
I think the tone control at the top end is still a little too severe. Now, if we look at the diagram, we can see that the tone control is this thing here, and it's driven largely by that 0.5 microfarad electrolytic across there, so we could easily change that and maybe make that capacitor a little bigger, and that might just knock the top end back a bit. So there's a couple of things we can do. In fact, I'll change that capacitor now, and we'll see if that makes any difference. Well, it made a little bit of difference, not as much as I'd have liked. In the end, I decided I'd change all the capacitors, all the electrolytic capacitors, one of which, this one down here, was particularly tricky because it required removal of the tuning mechanism. So, as usual, that takes a while to get back, although it's not as complicated as some of them are. Also, I have to say that the layout and the diagram don't entirely coincide, so I think there was a different version of this. It's definitely the right model, but the circuit diagram given in the manual and the circuit board layout given in the manual are not the same, and some of the values are different. So I went with replacing with the values that are on the board rather than the ones that are in the circuit diagram. Anyway, I think it's made some improvements. Now, as you'd imagine, given what I do here, I have many drawers full of many odd things, and one of those things, which isn't particularly related to this, is a drawer full of cufflinks and bow ties, and I needed cufflinks and a bow tie for the first time in quite a while for a function the other day, and while searching through that drawer I found this. Now, I've been looking for this for ages actually. It's a little speaker, it's pre-Bluetooth era, so it's not quite as useful nowadays as it used to be, but I used to take it on holiday and things like that quite a lot, so it's quite a tiny little thing, 3.5mm socket here that you plug into whatever you were listening to. Of course, phones don't have 3.5mm sockets now, and that's a whole other story. But then this little thing pops up and expands, a little concertina type thing, and I always used to find it quite handy, and also it's quite handy for testing radios that don't have speaker output properly and things like that. But I hadn't seen it for years, and I was convinced that I'd thrown it away. So I thought, that's great, let's find a lead and plug it in. And what I did then find is that, unfortunately, although I could find a weird type USB lead, A, when you plug it in you get a bit of hum, and B, it completely doesn't hold a charge. Although when it's plugged in, it does actually work. So if I plug it into a radio, course, it's a Sunday morning on BBC local radio. Yeah, it sounds pretty good actually. So if only I could work out if maybe it's possible to replace a rechargeable battery in it. So I thought that's a worthwhile project for a Sunday morning. Now, of course, the first challenge I've got is how do you get into the thing? Because I can't really see anything obvious. There's nothing on this side. Is it just all glued together? I'm going to have to break it. But I did notice that there are some very small screws here. I thought maybe that these sort of lugs here would unlock, but I don't think so because they're primarily so that they can lock the thing back together like that. So I think the key to it is going to be trying to get those tiny screws out. And so let's find a tiny screwdriver. Right, well, one of those screw heads was really difficult and had to use some rather brute force methods. I'm not sure I'm going to get that ever back in. And these are captive screws that go through the top here and then hold in this bottom bit. As you can see, is joined by a couple of very thin wires to the speaker itself. And then everything interesting happens on this board. And then the odd thing is, of course, this board doesn't seem to be readily detachable from the rest. Oh, no, maybe it is. Oh, perhaps it is. Yes, it just come off. Here we go. It's like there weren't any screws, so I couldn't really see much. So let's take that off. And obviously, this bit here is the battery. So there are two possibilities here. One is that we have a battery which no longer holds a charge and we need to find a battery and just replace it, and that will be the easy one. The other is that somehow the charging circuit is faulty, in which case it's pretty much unrepairable, I think. And, you know, this is all very tiny stuff, and the effort of trying to fix that and with no circuit details is probably going to be too much, given these things aren't very expensive. But let's have a look. And the way to check that, I think, is to just plug the charger in and see if any volts are appearing across the battery. So there's a measly volts appearing here across the battery at the moment without any power applied. So let's put the power into it. And we see the light comes on, which is a sort of promising thing, I think. Now let's see what we've got across here. Yeah, still 0.129 volts. So I'm sort of thinking really that the charger circuit isn't really working. That there must be 5 volts coming out of here somewhere. I can't quite get a probe on it, but there's obviously appearing across it enough to light the LED. But the charging bit, I'm guessing that's this little chip here. I don't know. Isn't actually working, which sort of means that it's a bit of a scrap item, really. Now, the other thing is, even if it was the battery, I have not been able to find another, and I don't know, it looks to me like it's a charging circuit. I've not been able to find another LiPo 3.7mm battery that is going to fit in here. I can find some of them, but they cost as much as a new speaker, so it seems a bit of a faff and a waste of time. So sadly, I'm going to have to write, you know, having been excited to find this while looking for a bow tie, I've now had to write it off. But all is not lost. Let's return to another video. Now I've hooked up the speaker element of it here to the bush that we were looking at the other day, where one of the commenters in the comments wisely suggested that I should investigate the possibility of a different speaker. And let's listen to it with this in place. Sounds pretty good, really. So if only I could get the speaker out of here and get it somehow into this, and it doesn't look too big, maybe that solved our problem. So I was trying to do this in as non-destructive way as I could, but I think it's mostly a matter of brute force, so I can sort of prize that away here, at least on a couple of sides now. I think maybe this one is the one to pull out next. And there it goes. There's just a springy thing there inside that concertina, and I should be able to just get, it looks like the speaker's glued in, which is a bit unfortunate, so I'm not sure how I get that speaker out. So let's get the spring off. That's a feat in itself. And yeah, this is definitely getting glue out, I think, on this point. Well, in the end, I got the speaker out by just cutting it away, which is, you know, I was never going to use that housing again, that's fine. Unfortunately, we now come to another problem, which is, although there's this nice little screw thing in the bush holding the speaker in, once I remove that, the speaker is itself glued into place and underneath these things, and I definitely don't want to break any of this because otherwise I'm going to wreck this radio. So now I've got to find a way to remove this speaker and put that speaker in its place. So in the end, a bit of isopropyl helped me get the glue off and prise this out without doing any damage, although I did have to take off this piece for the battery cover, but I'm sure we can get that back somehow. So in the end, what I did was repurpose this, which used to be here and purportedly held the speaker in, even though the speaker was glued in. I put this back here and then put a couple of washers here on this side to hold a much smaller speaker in place. Also rewired this bit to give me a bit more play on those wires when I put it back together. So let's do that.
Poison chalice, quite enough. All right. Just a thought.
And writer and poet Tony Walsh. And in a moment, we're going to be discussing proposed changes to the school day. First, in a dazzling variety of styles. The pleasure of sitting.
So there's an illustration of the value of people making comments on videos, because it caused me to have some ideas, or to develop some ideas in the comments, and we've got this radio back into a very good sounding radio again. So thanks for doing that, and keep doing it.